Good morning, good morning. I think we are live. I'm in Tulum, Mexico. I'm 6 hours behind in the time zone, so for me it's early morning. This is our Facebook Live training this week in the Optimize Your Personality for Success group. It will be very improvised this week because I don't have my usual equipment with me, so I have no slides. But I've made some notes on my laptop, which is here, and every now and then I'm going to look at my notes, guys. So, faulty childhood programming, how you recognize it, what it is, how it feels, what it does to you, and what you can do about it. That's what we're going to talk about today. And so, because I know many of you are here looking to address faulty childhood programming, so let's have this conversation. So, how do you know it's there? The first point I've written down, it usually feels very familiar, right? So, faulty childhood programming is the kind of thing where you almost think, oh, that's me, that's my personality. It's something that will have been with you for so long that it becomes like your shadow, basically inseparable from you. And you drag it around with you everywhere, and in certain situations it will come up, and when it comes up, it's just same old. You will have experienced it many times before, so very, very familiar. The second point I wrote down is it's very sticky, very persistent. And so many of you have tried many different things. You will have tried courses, you will have tried building up your skills, you will have tried self-help books, maybe coaching, maybe therapy, and because you're perceiving that there is this block there and you're working hard trying to overcome this block, and what it really is this faulty childhood programming that you don't get at typically with any of these things. So even inside the therapy world, there are maybe, in my estimation, and I've been at it now, as you know, for over 30 years, I would say maybe 5% of the market understands how to do process work in its complexity, and faulty childhood programming is very, very poorly understood. So they may offer you a certain amount, mostly understanding, and therapy tends to be very helpful with that, but it doesn't tend to be so helpful in identifying this kind of subtle programming, and least of all in helping you to understand it. Mostly it's only addressed on the cognitive level. So you're left with this piece which is really sticky, and I'll tell you about my story in a little while. Sticky, persistent, you don't really even know what it is, and you don't even know where it came from. Typically, you don't understand. It's lifelong. So most of the clients that I will have worked with in the last 6-7 years will, when we really get down to it, they will say, well, actually, I've known this most of my life. Now, the nature of it tends to change throughout your lifetime. So when you're young, you have certain hormones in your system that you don't have so much as you age. So you have more testosterone. Even as a woman, women have testosterone. And maybe more adrenaline, energy too. So you tend to push through more, and then maybe not notice certain things. But it's there, it's sitting there the whole time, waiting for the right moment to flare up. So for me, definitely, I noticed that difference as I got older. And in my 30s and 40s was when it really started to bother me. It may come with behavior cycles, is the next point I've written down. So mine was imposter syndrome, and there's a certain behavior cycle around avoidance. So I call these emotional roller coasters. I have a whole workshop around emotional roller coasters. And so these behavior cycles are basically coping mechanisms, and there's a lot of dopamine that travels along with them. And when the brain gets a large dopamine release, then what we're learning is, oh, this behavior is attractive, this behavior did its job, and so we do it again and again and again and again, and we reinforce these behavior cycles that we use to cope with the faulty childhood programming. They don't typically offer a solution, they're just coping mechanisms. The next point on my list about faulty childhood programming is my childhood was fine. And so my childhood was fine can be absolutely true. Can be absolutely true. Because these things can be just a small element of your childhood experience. That's why I don't call it childhood trauma, because typically by trauma, our understanding of trauma is that it's these major flags in, so all the abuses come under that flag, and people think they will have had a terrible childhood. But faulty childhood programming can happen in an environment where your parents are well-meaning. They just don't have the skills or the resources to support you adequately on an emotional level. And so my childhood is fine. If that's you, perfect. That's absolutely fine. And we all love to have nice memories of our childhood. It's such a lovely time in your life as well. And there will have been many happy experiences anyway, even if some things happened that weren't so good. And so honor those. That's absolutely perfect if you have those. They are very resourcing too. So let's spend a couple of minutes talking about what faulty childhood programming is. If it's not trauma, what is it? What is it all about? So there's a mechanism in the brain, and we all have that mechanism. It's in an older part of the brain called the limbic system. And the limbic system's main task is to help us to survive until we procreate. That's what nature cares about, essentially. That's the kind of jobs that are covered via natural selection so that the species can survive. And these mechanisms, this particular way of encoding certain memories, its main function is to help us with survival. So when the limbic system spots something, anything that it believes is relevant to help you to survive so that you can negotiate similar situations again in future, then what it will do is it will encode this experience, the memory of this experience, in a very particular way. And this particular way entails that you will always remember it. It will always sit there just beneath the surface. With a small trigger, it will come to life, it will flare up. And these emotions that flare up, it won't necessarily be a cognitive memory at all. So that's one of the hallmark characteristics too of faulty childhood programming, that you don't necessarily have a memory, a story, a narrative, or images to tie this memory to. It's a memory that comes through your emotions, through your body, and you may be left with very uncomfortable feelings in the body. You may be experiencing disturbing emotions. And so these are the hallmark characteristics. And to put it in context, as a child, so let me start the sentence a different way. This mechanism that I've described to you is the same mechanism that is used to encode outright trauma. So when you're in a car accident, for example, chances are 90% of the time your brain will encode aspects of that in this very particular way. But because children have immature brains, so when we're very young, our brain is still in development, the same mechanism will apply at a much lower threshold. So don't be thinking about faulty childhood programming from the perspective of an adult, because you're looking at a very young, very immature brain. And for this young, immature brain, the threshold of what's threatening, what's experienced as threatening, will have been much, much lower, much, much, much less. And so the kinds of experiences, when we go through them, from the perspective of an adult, they don't necessarily present a threat, but you have to think about how you would have thought and how you would have experienced things back then. And that was very, very different, right? So let's talk about the characteristics of faulty childhood programming. So how does it feel? What's your experience of it? Impossible to change is my first point. We've already touched on that. You may have tried many, many different things. And there will be this experience that maybe some of these things have touched on the faulty childhood programming. You may have, if you have experienced therapy, you may have very well touched on it previously. You may, in fact, very well understand it. You may have the insights. You may even be able to tie it to a particular dynamic that happened in your family of origin or a particular memory that you have. But still, it's like impossible to change. And that's because of the way it's encoded in your brain. And so to decode that, we need very particular tools, very particular processes to do that. And then it can be done in a way that's gentle, in a way that's actually very easy. Most people experience it as very easy. But it's like this quality that it feels impossible to change. Often has no cognitive memory. I've already talked about that aspect. And often has no connection to the original event. So some of you may, and probably the vast majority of you may not be able to tie this thing that bothers you to any particular memory, any particular family dynamic. You're just left clueless. And that's, of course, because as a child, your cognitive brain only really kicks in from when you're about 7 years of age. So anything that happened before you were 7 is very likely disconnected from cognition. And even after the age of 7, your brain is still developing. So there's no guarantee that there's a narrative or that there is a particular memory, which is one of the reasons that I use the personality model that I use, which has 9 different personalities. The beauty of that is that we can deduce from the personality that's showing up now in your day-to-day life, the things that you do, how you show up, the difficulties you experience, we can deduce to what is a likely constellation to have taken place there in childhood. So what I'll do is later on I'll pop a link underneath this video which brings you to my anxiety personality identifier test, where you can learn about one of these personalities. The test has 6 questions. It will bring back one personality. You would have to put in your email to get the test results. Now, some of you may choose to do that, others may not. All good and well, you will get plenty of content in this group anyway, whether you subscribe or not. But that's the link I will offer you if you want a deeper understanding, if you want to get a first taste for what is going on there. Now, the characteristics. You think it's your personality. I want to talk about that because it is so familiar, because it feels so impossible to change, because it's with you so much, because you come up against it all the time. The temptation is very strong to believe that, oh, that's only me. That's me, and I can't change it. It's my personality. This is just a quirk that I have. Most of the time, it's faulty childhood programming, we can identify what it is, we can work with it, we can reduce it in intensity, we can eventually clear it. So you don't have to contend yourself with having to live with this thing. You don't. It can be cleared. Something wrong with you. This is another really typical one that comes out of this whole same dynamic too. That when you've tried so many different things, like maybe self-help books, coaching, therapy, the whole palette of what's out there, and you've been trying and trying and trying to clear this obstacle, the ceiling you come up against, and ultimately there can be a real disencouragement that comes with that when so many different things don't work, and a belief can grow out of that, that there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me, that's why I have this thing. And then you keep it secret because it also comes charged with shame. And children very quickly respond with shame. And let's face it, children are shamed very easily. Shaming is still understood in some parts as a valid parenting method. So you may have in fact been exposed to that. And then this belief can be there too. There's something wrong with me. It becomes your biggest, deepest secret, right? So what I want to say as well is drop a like, drop a love. I forgot to say that at the beginning of this training. Let the algorithm know that you're getting something useful from this training. And if you identify with any of these characteristics that I'm talking about, if you now think you may have faulty childhood programming, then drop a hell yes underneath this video. So I can drop a hell yes for all of these things. I experienced them all. I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought it was my personality at one point. And you have to think I'm a psychotherapist, so I've done very intense personal work. I worked with this thing. For me, it was imposter syndrome. I worked with it, over years and years and years and years, and I sort of began to understand it, but I still believed there was something wrong with me, and it was my personality. And it did not shift until I eventually traveled back to the story of my birth. And that's another characteristic of faulty childhood programming, that it actually starts, the opening for it starts from when your mother is 7 months pregnant with you. Because already at that stage, your amygdala in the limbic system of the brain, remember, will be active and will start to record certain experiences. So when your mother experiences a threatening, frightening event, you are also affected by that while you are in the womb. If your birth, maybe because of medical issues, or maybe because of things that take place in the hospital that aren't clean medical issues, but hospitals aren't often aren't very friendly environments. So if your mother has a threatening or fearful experience, then that is likely to filter through to you as a baby. And as a newborn too, if your needs aren't met, your biological needs aren't met, that you're close to your mother, that you're held safe, that you can hear her voice, can hear her heartbeat, you're in a warm, welcoming environment, then the stress hormones after birth can't calm down adequately in a natural environment. And that leads to this type of chronic stress that I'm talking about. So faulty childhood programming is a form of chronic stress. And when you have that in there from very early on, what tends to happen is other similar experiences will be encoded in the same way, and they all stack up over time and make this thing bigger and bigger and bigger. And it will have been like that for me. But it started with a birth experience. And so let me scroll down a little because I'm running out of notes. I hope this is really valuable for you to get this insight, this understanding. My next bullet point here says connected to relationships. So faulty childhood programming takes place most of the time, maybe not in that birth situation, but certainly from when you're a toddler, it always takes place in the context of a relationship. And that's the relationship with your caregivers. So whatever feedback you get, whatever type of care you get from them, that will determine what you download about the nature of relationships. And so much of the faulty childhood programming is where we learn how to do relationship and how we should relate to other people, what good relationships look like. And of course, we're often downloading negative, the qualities that make up negative relationships, but it's supposed to be learning about having positive, healthy, safe relationships, ideally if your caregivers are well resourced, but that doesn't always happen. Not at peace with yourself is another characteristic. So it will continue to bother you, even though you believe it's your personality, even though you believe it cannot be changed. But it's like it nags at you and you're still looking to change it, because we all have this inbuilt mechanism too, in a different part of the brain, in the prefrontal cortex, for growth. We all want to grow, we all want to develop, we all want to improve, and that ambition is there, and then it comes up against this mechanism from the limbic system, and the two are in conflict and they don't communicate very well a lot of the time. And so that's what you're left with. You're unsettled, not at peace with yourself. You keep trying, keep coming up against it. Now let's talk about a few examples of typical things I would see in faulty childhood programming. And so I've already said my own example was self-doubt or imposter syndrome, which is a big label really, and many different presentations travel under that label. It's on a spectrum. It can be very mild. It can be that a conversation with your business mentor is enough to help you take that next step and help you over the self-doubt. That's also called imposter syndrome. And at the other extreme of that spectrum, you have what I had, something that's driven by an unconscious encoding that you have no memory of, that you don't understand, that's coming up in physical, emotional symptoms, and it's holding you back in a very severe way. So anytime I tried to take action, there was this massive fear holding me back, and I just couldn't step over my shadow. And so anything on that spectrum of severity is called imposter syndrome, but on the mild end, it's likely not to be faulty childhood programming. It's just an obstacle in the moment. Being overly accommodating. So when you grow up in an environment where perhaps there's a very dominant person in the household, maybe somebody with an addiction problem, alcoholism is something that I see a lot, doing this kind of thing. People in the family tend to dance around this person and accommodate them. They can be maybe very volatile, and you don't know what's going to happen next in their behavior. And so you grow up in an environment where the other caregiver may actually encourage you to be very accommodating of, say it's the father, that's what I see a lot, who's an alcoholic. The mother may encourage you to be very accommodating of the father so that he will be in a good mood. And so you grow up in this environment where you're encouraged to essentially suppress your own needs, your own wants, your own, really your own getting to know yourself even. You may not even know what it is you need and want. And you learn instead to put your focus on other people. And that can present later in life as traveling under the label of people-pleasing, traveling under the label of being overly accommodating, traveling under the label of not having healthy boundaries, finding it very hard to say no. Any amount of things. There are other labels that come in to this that I can't think of right now. And so the next one I see a lot is feeling helpless. Feeling helpless when it comes to meeting your needs, when it comes to realizing your dreams and ambitions, and constantly feeling like you need support, even as an adult, feeling that way, that even with small obstacles, you can't do it on your own. You need help, you need support. Now that goes back to not having had that help or support at a very tender age. And it's like this is the small toddler that continues to cry, that continues. It's a good thing, you know, in a way. They never become discouraged from still looking for that help, looking for that support. But of course, the problem is in adult life, that's not really appropriate anymore. You're supposed to solve your own problems, and people will often be put off by that. And it can become a very distinguishing dynamic in your relationships that puts people off. And so then it becomes your biggest, most private secret, and there can be a lot of shame that travels along with that. But that's something I would see a lot and work with a lot with my clients. And then you have the opposite of that, extreme independence. Independence so extreme that it's hard to entertain any close relationships at all. And believe it or not, the core of that experience is the very same. It's the absence of adequate help and support in very, very early life, when you were a toddler, really, from that age on. There was no help, no support, and what you downloaded was, I have to do this on my own. There is no help, there is no support. That's what the world is like. I better get to it, I better do it. But of course, what also comes with the doing is a constant anxiety, because you don't feel secure. You never know, are you doing it right? Are you doing it wrong? Is this gonna work out? You're always walking on eggshells with this extreme independence. And it will affect your relationships, because it's impossible to be close. And yeah, without breaking into too much detail here, if you want to find out more, do that personality test and you'll learn more. Active inner critic. And that probably travels through most of the personality types in the test. That there is this perception that I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. This is a flaw that I have, meaning the faulty childhood programming. And that's how we're walking around. We're walking around with this perceived flaw, this perceived personality fault. We're just not enough is a persistent belief that I see. So what does that do to you then when you can't resolve it? You have an awareness, but you're not getting at it. It knocks your confidence over time. It's a dent in your emotional resilience. And as that dent persists, you will find certain things or certain areas in which you're very vulnerable in life, in business, across the board, usually in more than one arena in life. And so it's a vulnerability you're living with, and it comes up in certain situations. It may not be there a lot of the time, but given a similar situation, your limbic system will be activated. The memory, if feelings, emotions, body sensations are also a memory, will be activated. You find yourself in a similar constellation, boom, there you go again. And this thing comes back, it's persistent, knocks your confidence every time it comes up, because you think, gosh, at this stage I should have resolved it. And I remember this so well, being in this space. The surprise element when it comes up again, and you're like, gosh, this cannot be true, here we go again. And the same intensity of emotion tends to come with a very high intensity in emotion, because it reflects the intensity that was there when you were a young kid, right? So you have to think immature brain, you have to think intensity, not necessarily comprehensible to a grown-up. So what can you do about it? What can you do about the faulty childhood programming? And I think a really good place to start, and that's one thing I teach my clients to always practice, is mindful observation. Get to know these patterns, get to know how you tick, get to know what the triggers are. Write it down, do some journaling afterwards, because it's so easy to forget. So mindful observation is a practice where you imagine you have an observer sitting on your shoulder. And this observer is always there and observes you in relation to this thing that you want to learn more of. So using my example, I could say to the observer, let's become curious. Curious is a clue here, because you never place judgment. It's not about knocking yourself, it's about becoming curious. So let's become curious why I come up against these obstacles all of the time, or how rather I made the same mistake that I tell everyone not to make. A why question is not a good question to ask when you're observing. Let's ask how questions. Let's ask, how does this work when I come up against this obstacle? So that I can understand the why eventually, but let's find out, how does this work? What are the triggers? What are the typical situations where this comes up? How is a good question to ask. How exactly does this play out? And then recording all of this information in journaling, and you will start to see certain patterns that play out over a longer period of time. So I would encourage you to practice that. It doesn't take up any extra time in your day. Once you have it set up, once you have the practice in place with an observer, it can basically run parallel to your everyday life. And it's a very valuable thing to do. The journaling is my second tip. Write it down, because we're so quick to forget things. And it's only through journaling that you will start to be able to identify the pattern. And my third tip is come along to one of my free events. They are always advertised in this group. So I have different types of events. Currently I have an emotion reset. That's where you can address the emotions that you've identified, maybe through your mindful observation. And the emotions that bother you, that high intensity I talked about. And I have an emotional roller coaster workshop, which is where we deal with behavior patterns and help you to understand those behavior patterns better. So that will also be very worthwhile for you. These workshops offer you a great starting place to get some work done for free, to see how this is done, to meet me, work with me live for free, and get a chunk of work done, essentially bring you down the road somewhat. And so I hope this presentation here today from Tulum, Mexico, where I was on my business mastermind for the last 12 days. I've really enjoyed it. It's a wonderful culture here, gorgeous food, lovely temperatures. It's a nice break from the Irish winter, which tends to drag on at this stage. So I hope this was valuable today, in a very informal setting from my hotel room here. And if you found it valuable, please drop a like, please drop a love, let the algorithm know that it was valuable. And I will see you soon. I will see you next week for another training, and I will see you soon at one of my events to look out for when that's announced in the group. Underneath the video, I will later on drop the link to the anxiety personality identifier if you want to follow up on this training. Lovely to have been here, and I will see you next week. Have a great